Hi, I'm Ed and I've been screen printing for about 18 months and I taught myself using purely forum posts and YouTube tutorials. And while I was learning, I discovered loads of little sort of hints and tricks and loads of little bits of information that a lot of the tutorials and stuff that I'd watched and that I'd read had completely missed out or glossed over. And if I'd actually known those things to start with, it would have sped up the whole learning process and made a lot of the silly mistakes that I'd made at the beginning I wouldn't have made. So I decided to make this video series in the hope that I can help at least someone else avoid some of the same mistakes that I did. So we've got our film positive, we've got our screen in the first 3 videos, and now it's time to burn the screen. This is probably one of the most critical parts of the whole process. And it's one of the parts that I've struggled with the most. Obviously not having the proper exposure unit and washout booth and stuff like that makes this a little bit more tricky. It's still not really difficult to do. You just have to pay slightly more attention to what you're doing. And I'd say that the most important thing about this step of the process is to be as consistent as you can. You are going to mess up screens. I've burnt probably close to 100 screens, but I've only used about 20 because I've got it wrong so many times, because it's just trial and error. When you're doing it at home like this, there's so many variables, it's really difficult to pin down what the precise problem is sometimes. And what I'm going to do, because this is a light sensitive operation, I'm going to demonstrate with this screen, which has already got a design burnt in it obviously, but then I'll swap over to the screen I've got drying at the moment and do it in real life, in real time. So we've got our screen, which in theory has not been exposed to light yet, and I've got my film positives, and these are printed on OHP transparency, which I will have gone through in the last video. And there's only a couple more bits of kit needed for this really, and that is a piece of glass. Now I just use a piece of glass from a picture frame, and that is to weigh down and keep the transparency flat while the image is burnt onto the screen. And also I've got this 500 watt halogen work light, which we're going to use to actually burn that's what we're going to use as the exposure. That's essentially our exposure unit. And then a tape measure to measure the distance between the front of the screen and the light. Like I said, it's really important to be consistent in this process. And so what I've done is I've written down the settings that work for me. And it's going to depend on the age of your emulsion, the type of emulsion you have, the power of your light, how far away from the screen the light is, and loads of variables. So you're going to have to experiment with this, and there's no easy process, no easy way to speed this up really. It is just trial and error, but you can get roughly close, I think. So let's start. I'm going to put this light out the way to start with. So what I always do is I always get a towel and I fold it to the shape and size of the inside of my screen, and I actually put my screen over the top of that, and that's just to stop any light from reflecting through and coming back and curing parts of your design that you don't want cured. Otherwise it's not going to wash out properly. And then what you want to do is you want to place your film positives, your designs, and I'm actually burning 2 designs into this screen so I can use the same screen for 2 different designs, and then I'll just tape off whichever one I'm not going to print at the time. You want to place these face down on your screen. Now, when you're burning the design, they actually need to be backwards because you're going to be printing from the opposite side of this screen. So you actually want to turn, and I don't know if you can see this design, you actually want to turn your design and lay it this way round on your screen, so that when you're pushing the ink through from the other side, it's obviously going to read correct. Now this particular design is for a left breast print, so I'm going to put this up sort of slightly over to the right hand side of my screen obviously, because we're backwards here. And the same with this design. This is actually a mid-chest print, so this can go sort of towards the top of the screen, just underneath that left breast. And usually I'd use a square just to make sure these designs are square when I'm placing them on. But you've got to remember that this emulsion is going to be photosensitive as you're doing this. I do it in sort of dimmed light. This is similar to conditions where when I coated the screen with emulsion, but you're going to want to do this fairly quickly because your screen is going to be going off all the time as you're doing this. So you do want to do this process fairly quickly. So once you've got your designs where you want them, I then take my piece of glass and place that over. And that is because this halogen light kicks out quite a lot of heat. That glass holds the film positives down because otherwise they would curl up as you were curing them. And obviously that's going to completely ruin the exposure. So it's a piece of glass from a picture frame that is just up in my house. I just take it out, give it a polish. You want everything to be as clean as possible for this because if you get any bits of dust, it could potentially burn the image of the dust into the screen. So you give it a polish, place it over your designs, make sure they don't move when you put the glass down, and then you want to get your light. Now, like I said, this is a 500 watt halogen light, and I think the bulb is actually 320 watts. I don't think it's actually a 500 watt bulb. And you want to get your light to be as central over the screen as possible. So what I usually do is I lean it against the table, and I always do it 50 centimetres above the design every time. And that is just so that I know I can repeat almost exactly what I've done before. Like I said, consistency is key to this. And if something goes wrong, if you're doing everything exactly the same, it's a lot easier to pin down exactly what your problem is. So that's 50 centimetres now. And you want to make sure that that's roughly in the centre. Obviously, if you've got it coming from one side, it's going to burn. It's only going to be minute, but I've had it happen before. It'll actually burn the shadow, and you'll see a shadow. So you want it as directly over the centre, over the top as possible. And then you're good to go. So what I usually do is I just use the timer on my phone. And like I said before, all emulsions are going to be different. Depending on the power of your light, it's going to be a different length of time. How long you've had your screen exposed to the light before you've actually started this process. So just in the process of taking it from where you've coated it to where you've let it dry, and then from where you've let it dry to here, obviously that could be 5 minutes, it could be 10 minutes. It's already started to go off as soon as it starts being exposed to light. So it's going to be a different length of time. I started off, I think most tutorials were saying 12 minutes. But I think that's with a proper exposure unit, which is obviously a lot brighter than what this light is. So I've increased my time gradually. The first time I did it, I think I did 12 minutes, and then that wasn't long enough, and my screen washed out, so I increased the time up to 15, and I was finding I still wasn't getting as good a detail as I wanted, and some of the screen would start to wash out after before my design had fully washed out, so then I increased it more. And then I found that was too long, and some of my design wouldn't wash out at all, so I've had to knock it back down again. So I've narrowed my time down, and now I do 16 minutes 45 seconds, and that seems to be good for this emulsion. And this setup here, 50 centimetres away with a 500 watt light, which I don't actually think is 500 watts. And that seems to wash out really well, but the emulsion around the design doesn't. So I think the key here is experimentation, and it is frustrating, but it's just there's so many variables that I can't give you a precise methodology for this. So that's how you do it. Let's get on and do it in real life. So I've knocked the lights off. Our screen I've just brought out of the cupboard, and you can see there are drips here, which is why it's really important to make sure the coat is even. But in the centre where our design's going to be is fine, so that's good. And you can see I'm working reasonably quickly now. Design's back to front. So this is a left chest, so that's going to be at upper right of this screen, and then this is a mid chest, so that is going to go just below. And now I'm just going to check this is square, and you notice I've knocked the lights off as well. And now this is a bit tricky because we've still got ragged edges on our screen material. So I just use a square up to the edge of the screen just to make sure the designs are level. Obviously, if they're not level when you print them, they're going to look squint, which is not ideal. So I'm just squaring these up before we put the glass on top. So they're nice and square now. So here's my sheet of glass. So glass goes over the top, and you just want to make sure that these designs don't move when you put this glass down. So that is now ready to burn. So light over the centre. Obviously I've already set this up before. Timer, 16.5 minutes. Go, light on. We're now burning our designs into this screen. So I'm just going to leave that for 16 minutes 45. So when the timer finishes, I'm going to take this up to the bathroom and I'm going to wet it down, and then we're going to wash the design out. And with any luck, then it's going to wash out fine, and then it's safe to expose to the light then. Like I said, consistency is key with this process. If you keep as much the same as you can, then when you do have problems, it's much easier to narrow them down. So I've given my screen the proper exposure time. The first thing I'm going to do is just quickly wet this down and leave it to sit for sort of 15-20 seconds. This is just to let the emulsion sort of soften, which will make it a little bit easier to wash out. Now you've got to bear in mind that this is going to be curing the whole time, so now you've got to work fairly quickly. That's looking pretty good. That washed out really easily. And you want to inspect your design fairly closely, because if there's any bits that you forget or miss now, they're going to be burnt into your screen forever. So you really want to check your design carefully, just to make sure that there's no little sort of pin dots that are left on your design, because obviously they're going to print. And actually, halfway through the burn on this one, I realised I'd put the left chest print on the right-hand side of this screen. And I think that was purely because I was distracted because I'm filming this video. So it really pays to pay attention. It's really worthwhile to kind of spend a bit of care doing this. And also, when I put the glass down, it looks like that chest print has actually moved, so it's not quite square to the frame. Which is okay. We can make up for that when we actually clamp the screen into the machine. But it's not ideal. It's going to make the setup just a little bit more time consuming. And that looks good. So now the screen's burnt, the design's washed out, so now we just need to leave this to dry, and then that's our screen made. So you can see that I've got pinhole lines across the C. Which is where my film positive joined. And you can actually see I didn't burn this for quite long enough, so I might need to adjust my exposure time a little bit. You can see where the seed just started washing out. But that's the only place on this design that started to wash out, and I think that was because I was actually scrubbing around here with a brush while I was washing out my screen. So the extra agitation, I think, just helped that wash out a little bit easier than it should have. So what I'm going to do is I'm literally going to take a tiny little paintbrush and I'm just going to paint emulsion back onto this part of the design where it should be covered with emulsion. And then I'm just going to do this in the light, because obviously it doesn't matter if this gets exposed now, because we want this to be blocked up. So I've used a tiny little art brush, it goes to a thin point, just to paint in my emulsion where I had some washout on that sea. You can see I've just there where it was quite bad, and then there was a little bit of a patch here which I've just painted in, and there was a couple of little dots here, so I've just painted those in. And actually I had a hairline as well that came up through the T on this design above, because I burnt 2 designs into this screen. So I just painted along the hairline, and actually it goes through the T and through the O as well. So I'm not actually sure what I'm going to do about that yet, because that's actually burnt into the screen now. And also I painted in where it was a bit sketchy around the bottom of the O in the end. So if you've got a bit of washout, or if you've got a sort of bits that washed out, and it's not enough to warrant starting again and burning a new screen, you can actually do this with a little brush and rescue a screen.